So it's kind of hard to not feel like the Dungeons & Dragons team just massively embarrassed themselves by accident, and even better, it doesn't even seem like they're aware of it. In fact, they almost seem proud of it. If you've seen my videos before, you probably know that I generally try and take a balanced approach to my delivery. I will often give the design team the benefit of the doubt and take their words at face value unless it feels obvious that something else is at play. I do this because I don't want to paint an overly optimistic view, but I equally don't just want to spew negativity either. I've always felt like the best approach is one that considers as many angles as possible and draws conclusions accordingly. This time though, I've honestly been at a loss for words for a few days now as I've been trying to write this script. In their most recent video, Jeremy Crawford and Todd Kenrick discussed the survey results for the Player's Handbook UA5 document, and one of the things they say is just so baffling that I can't believe that they actually left it in, and it makes me question this entire process on a much deeper level. I'm just going to play the clip in full in case you haven't seen it.
So the Barbarian overall was received well. The Barbarian class itself got 77% satisfaction, with most of the features inside the class receiving a score over 80%. And so if you actually averaged the satisfaction of the features themselves, the Barbarian satisfaction is actually over 80%.
Oh, interesting.
We see that sometimes. There's an interesting thing that because people give their overall score for a class before they give their satisfaction for each of the individual elements, we'll see sometimes that people will actually lowball a little bit, but then get into the features and score everything 80% or higher, but they might have said 75% overall satisfaction. So that's a very interesting thing that we then dig into.
So in case you're still unclear about why this 1 minute seemingly throwaway comment is of such significance, I'll break it down. This is actually incredibly telling of the design team's evaluation and feedback process, and concerningly indicates to an outsider that they simply don't know how to distinguish between things that people like and things that are missing. Simply put, the sum of something can be much less than the value of its component parts. If you enjoy what I do and would like to support me in reaching my goal of 3,000 subscribers by the end of August, a sub to the channel would mean so much. Thank you to everyone, especially those people who thought I was already over 100k, that truly made my day. Thanks. Since the Barbarian was the example used in the clip, I'll just carry on with that. Someone could absolutely love every feature that was added or updated in the UA. They could be indicating that they are very satisfied with the updates to Rage, Weapon Masteries, Primal Knowledge, and whatever else, but this is still absolutely not indicative of someone's overall satisfaction with the class as a whole. The satisfaction questions about features are specific. They're asking you to define your overall level of satisfaction with one specific thing. The satisfaction questions related to classes are so much more vague and open-ended, since even if you love Rage and Weapon Masteries, the question is asking you to think about your overall satisfaction level with the class. You might feel like the Barbarian is missing a whole bunch of things from its toolkit that would make you enjoy it even more, or that you might like certain features individually, but maybe you don't find that they work well together and don't help to define the class. The question of class identity is something else that you are implicitly answering when determining your overall level of satisfaction with the class, and that isn't really addressed when answering about individual features. Based on their words, the team is either simply ignoring or misrepresenting massive swaths of data. All of this obviously comes with the huge caveat of the comments that the respondents provide. Someone answering about Weapon Mastery could state that they are satisfied with the feature overall, and then write in the comments that they don't feel like it does enough to provide an identity for the Barbarian, or that it doesn't necessarily allow for interesting use cases outside of combat, or, worst of all, they might not provide any comments since all comment fields are optional in the survey. So perhaps there is a world where everyone is answering every question on the survey in full detail and articulating themselves perfectly, but the reality is much more likely that most people aren't fully answering the questions, they're leaving comments blank, or not articulating the specific issue or omission that they might have with any particular feature or class, and this leaves so much room for interpretation from the design team, which is probably why we see them put such a heavy reliance on these satisfaction scores, and though we do sometimes, we don't often hear very much at all about the specific comments that are left. The troubles I'm describing here only seem to get worse when we consider what was revealed at Gen Con this year, which is that there's only something like 2 or 3 people that are actually dedicated to poring over the survey data and generating analyses from that information. That is not enough people. We know that there have been tens of thousands of survey responses since the UA process began, and while yeah, it's been over a year and the survey results are often given months after the initial release of the document, for example, we are just now seeing the results from UA 5 when UA 7 is just around the corner, this doesn't suggest a lot about the quality of the survey responses to me. The numbers that they get are obviously very easy to sort through, but reading through potentially tens of thousands of comment fields per survey and generating useful, actionable data in a reasonable time with such a small amount of resources seems questionable at best. I would like to hope that there is some kind of software, AI or otherwise, that is assisting in the process, but we simply don't know and I don't want to speculate on that. The biggest gap here is that based on how few people are actively working on digging through the data, it heavily suggests that the team is making design decisions about future UAs prior to having the results from an earlier one, which again calls the whole process into question. The alternative is that they're making those decisions solely based on satisfaction scores, which are very easy to generate admittedly, but they're not considering the comment data until after the fact, which really makes it feel like the surveys don't feel worth their time. Now, to his credit, Jeremy Crawford acknowledges this potential gap and says that the team digs into the written feedback to see if there is a story to listen to so they can identify ways of bringing the scores up.
So again, there's sometimes this interesting disconnect between, all right, I have this view of the class overall as I'm taking the survey, but then when I actually score each of the individual pieces, if you then average those, often the satisfaction score for the class is higher than how the person scored it up front. We dig into the written feedback to find out, is there a story to listen to there? How can we improve things so that overall...
But now I'm just not so sure how that's possible, since there's always such a lag in gathering that information and presenting changes based upon it. I think the big takeaway from this whole thing though is that it really seems like the team is placing a much higher emphasis on satisfaction scores than the written feedback, and this seems evident in many of the changes that we have seen in recent UAs. It feels like the team is chasing a number rather than actual satisfaction, and worse, they're chasing a number and seemingly surrounding it with inaccurate context, giving it far more importance than it probably deserves. Jeremy Crawford mentioned that the reason that classes tend to get lower scores than the individual features is because respondents answer the question about class satisfaction first, so they tend to lowball it, and then once they get into the features, they remember that they like them and give it a higher score. This interpretation is so jarring to me that I really have to assume that they must be aware of just how incomplete a picture that paints and are probably just distilling the information down to be as concise as possible for a short video, right? Right? I truly just don't know anymore. It's confusing and misleading at best and embarrassing and ignorant at worst. This video actually provided us with a lot more information that I want to touch on as well, some of which continues to highlight the fact that the team doesn't seem to be either reading or generating valuable feedback from the written comments. Firstly, the group spell lists are going away. This is something which has been at least somewhat contentious since the first Unearthed Arcana, but I think a lot of people who initially didn't like it actually have come around to it, including me. It allows for greater extensibility for future releases and made it easier for players, particularly new ones using certain subclasses, to know where to look for spells that apply to them. I'm surprised to see that this is going away, as most conversations I've seen online express disappointment for this reversion. This seems to be following the same trend set out by the reversion to class progression to match 5th edition, another change which seems to not really be appreciated that much by the community. We also learned that changes that are not found to be satisfactory will simply be reverting to their 2014 version, albeit with some wording clarifications. I think this is something that most of us knew or expected, but it's hard to not feel disappointed in changes simply being dumped rather than iterated on. This is presumably at least partially related to their self-imposed deadline of 2024 to release the updated core rulebooks, rather than waiting until they're ready. With all that being said though, I will give credit where it's due. Although we don't know many of the details yet, Jeremy Crawford did indicate that the Warlock will be reverting to pack magic rather than the spellcasting change that we saw in UA 5, which I think to be a great change and likely accurately reflective of community feedback. When I stop and think about it, I just feel more conflicted and confused than I have at any other point during this whole process. It feels like so many good ideas are being abandoned because of timing, or that they were just never planning on actually implementing them in the first place. I've said in past videos that I don't think that the game is necessarily being rushed, and I still largely stand by that statement, in the sense that I don't think that it has to be, but many of the decisions that they are making are suggesting otherwise. This, combined with the fact that many of the things that they're stating publicly imply that they don't really understand their own survey, it doesn't really inspire much confidence. I mentioned at the beginning that I like to take their words at face value and try not to speculate where there isn't evidence to support it. Well, if I do that for the good, I'm gonna have to do it for the bad too. Hopefully they provide some additional clarification in future videos, but until then, it's really all up in the air. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to help me reach my goal of 3,000 subscribers by the end of August. I truly appreciate all of the support. Otherwise, take care.